All right, this is your World War III update. I've just received some critical information from a source inside Poland that suggests that that country has now reached its penultimate stage of combat readiness, something akin to Defcon 2, meaning that the prospect for conventional or unconventional, i.e. nuclear crisis, is extremely high at this point in time. I'm going to go over all the details of how this is going to manifest in terms of how the military is going to be conducting itself there from this point forward. As well, we have to talk about some very suspicious NATO exercises in that country that suggest they indeed are preparing for a large-scale conflict with the Russians. Now, before we talk about all the details, just to bring you guys up to speed with respect to what has happened this week. On Monday, Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, announced at the Paris conference, that they were considering putting troops on the ground in Ukraine. A couple days later, that was confirmed when Macron indeed said that they will be putting special forces into the country to engage in demining operations in a non-combatant role and to perform peacekeeping duties and blah, 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 and maybe help out with the administration of weapons systems. Of course, that's the primary role here. Now, I implore people to understand one thing about this war that is being waged, because it's very easy to presume that what you are seeing in the media, that is the high point of information that both sides have. There's two wars going on right now, okay? There's a spy war, there's a clandestine war between nation states to intercept information. It's a surveillance, it's a reconnaissance, it's a spy war. The James Bond thing is a real thing. It happens behind the scenes. Why? Because it's the most important force multiplier. A little string of code, a single sentence of information can determine the course of an entire conflict. This was evident in World War II, when the Japanese lost a crucial naval battle that essentially led to their demise. But information is the most potent thing. So the Russians are listening to our generals talk, and our generals are likely listening to the Russian generals talk. And what we see on the surface, the information that is promulgated on mainstream news, that is just the fluff. That is just scratching the surface. A lot of that stuff is either put there to telegraph to the other side, because you see, neither side is going to want to compromise its sources. So if the Russians have information, if they're listening in to what we're planning on doing, they're not going to scream to the media, hey, this is what they're doing, this is what they're planning. Unless it's strategic for them to do so. Why? Because then they give up their sources. And then we lock everything down, and then we change all the passwords, and we try to tighten up security a lot, which makes it harder for them to know from that point forward. So if you have a mole, or if you are surveilling what the other side is saying, you want to keep that quiet. Now, look at the sequence of events, guys. Macron comes out on Monday, and he says, hey, we're going to be sending troops in. 3 days later, the Russians are leaking this call between German officers that are planning on deploying Taurus missiles inside Ukraine for this dedicated purpose of targeting the Crimean Bridge. The Russians leaked that. The Germans haven't denied it. They agree that it's a real call. Now, the question is it something that the Germans wanted the Russians to intercept? Okay, was this just a 4D ruse, knowing that there is this multi-billion-dollar spy war happening behind the scenes that really does dictate where this war goes? Okay, you're not gonna hear on the news in advance that a nuclear war is imminent, but the back channels are gonna know if it's imminent. The manifestations in the mainstream in terms of what is publicly disseminated is all just fluff. So you have to look at the sequence, the timeline of events. I know what I'm saying is kind of confusing, but nothing is cut and dry, okay? There's so many multi-level sting operations that are currently ongoing, coup attempts, backstabbing that are happening behind the scenes, that to really try to understand what is truly happening in the intelligence world would probably take many, many hours, if not days, to try to fully unravel and explain. And I don't claim to have all the answers. I just know that we can infer that that's what's happening right now. All you can do in terms of making out what is about to happen is look at the kinetic military reality that's on the ground. There's a high-intensity conflict currently being waged inside Ukraine. NATO is starting to prepare and send troops to the border regions of Russia, Belarus, and Western Ukraine. We know that for a fact. We know that the Russians are accelerating their nuclear weapons deployment systems. Okay, we know that these kinetic realities resist. So in spite of everything that is said, we know that that's a reality, and we can presume then that this Russian supposed leak, I think that Macron knew that this leak was coming, and they decided to front run it by talking about the deployment of troops on the ground, so to just confound the situation even more, to create confusion. You remember 2 months ago, for example, when all of the NATO leaders, almost in unison, like one after another, they started coming out and saying, we need to prepare for World War III. Do you think that was just a coincidence? Do you think it was just incidental that defense ministers, prime ministers, presidents, former retired generals, NATO chiefs of staff, do you think it was a coincidence that they all came out within the span of a few weeks and were advising their populations that you need to either prepare for World War III and we got to start talking about conscription? That was not a coincidence. Something happened under the surface in this spy game that precipitated that disclosure, that public disclosure. So I hope that's making sense. I just want people to understand that this is not a cut and dry situation. There is not going to be, okay, the war is going to start. You have 48 hours. It's going to blindside us no matter what, because there's so many multi-layers to this. It's like Inception, only in the world of espionage. And we can only probably not even, if they ever make a movie of this someday, if we ever get the truth of what is happening, it's probably going to be one of those movies you got to watch 50 times to truly understand what's going on. Now, here are some cold hard facts for you now that I've completely confused everybody. Okay, let's get specific. The Polish Prime Minister, Donald Tusk, has issued a decree raising the state of readiness to the second highest level, Bravo, in a scale of 4. So that's the penultimate stage of readiness, okay? That's right before the highest state of readiness, like combat, war is imminent, and possibly nuclear war is imminent. This, of course, is going to coincide with Europe's overall Defcon preparedness. Among its many elements, and this is going to be in place until the end of May, which, of course, is going to coincide with the Steadfast Defender exercise, the largest NATO exercise when paired with all the other exercises that are running concurrently throughout Europe and inside Poland. It is the biggest NATO exercise ever conducted, and arguably one of the most sensitive, considering there's a big hot war happening right next to it. Those other NATO exercises that happened during the Cold War, there was never a big war like this being fought at the same time. Among its many elements, this state of readiness includes, among others, policemen, border guards, and military policemen bearing bulletproof vests and assault rifles as opposed to normal handguns. Security checks in public transport. All letters and parcels to authorities of any level to be checked for bombs. Schools and universities to only be accessible for students and staff. And 5, the inventory of warehouses which store strategic supplies of medicines and medical equipment to be double checked. Now, I've been breaking down all of the changes in the laws in Poland in the past couple months, and they all point towards conflict. Okay, the air alerts, the marking the borders as critical infrastructure, making it illegal to protest there, the deployment of various military personnel to these critical infrastructures. Poland is preparing for conflict. There's more information as well. I just want to give you guys a heads up, though, before we go any further, because I could end up talking for another half an hour here. We did finally get a new substitute to the Berkey. Okay, so if some of you are familiar with the whole Berkey fiasco that is currently ongoing, I believe that it's one part government overreach, and it's probably another part of irresponsibility on the part of the Berkey company. But there is now a new game in town, and it's the ProOne gravity water filtration system. It's a simple solution. It's a gravity filter. This is what you want for water purification. If you have a life straw, that's great. That's a start. It's within the realm of most people's affordability nowadays, seeing as credit card debts are sky high and only going higher. But the Pro1 is actually certified to filter out all the things. Now, the Berkeys will still work. I mean, by and large, you're trying to filter out bacteria when it comes to survival. Viruses are going to be very rare, but this and the Berkey can filter out viruses. They filter out different types of metals. It is a carbon-based and not a HEPA filtration system, but it's a filtration system, but it also has that carbon component to it. So it's going to filter out pretty much everything. It's a one-and-done solution. You can buy reusable filters as well. We have limited supply because since Berkey went under, this is, and I know they haven't fully went under yet, but it's looking pretty bad for the Berkey company. So this is the next best solution. We do have a limited supply, so go and scoop one up at Canadian Preparedness. This is the most practical solution. When the grid goes down, you're not going to just be going out to a puddle to drink from every other day. You're not just going to be fetching water and drinking it with your life straw. That is not a practical solution. You need a gravity filter, something where you can just go scoop water, pour it into the top. It's going to filter it out as it comes down to the basin. And we're going to do a dedicated review of this just so people understand how it works. But this is ultimately what you want. Now, you can do the bucket thing where you make your own Berkey. That's an option too. And if you guys want, we can make another video of that. I mean, that's not hard to do. But if you want something that actually serves a dual function in that your wife's not going to kill you if it's in the kitchen and you can use it on a regular, and maybe you live on an acreage and you're not sure about the water, maybe you live in a city and you're not sure about the water quality, this is something you can use all the time, okay? So anyways, check that out. And we also got in the new WHOLEHOME. This isn't actually it. This is the Zender Companies. This is one of their smaller, more portable units, a portable off-grid power solution. But we also now have the SuperBase V in stock, okay? And these are WHOLEHOME solutions. So these are like basically something that rivals the Tesla Powerwall in terms of the amount of power that you can store. So go and check that out. I'll post links in the description. Now, getting back to what is happening in Poland. In the next few months, the Ministry of Defense will be placing into space the first series of Polish spy satellites. Also, and this is very concerning, the General Command of the branches of the Polish Armed Forces has announced that on March 13th, as a part of the Dragon 24 exercises, this is one of the exercises running concurrent to Steadfast Noon. So when taken as a whole, this is the biggest NATO exercise happening, and it must be emphasized that we are closer to nuclear war than ever before in history, bar none. Takeoff and landing practicing will be carried out by all sorts of fighter jets on a public road. Emphasis on a public road in the northeast of Poland. Now, the types of jets they're going to be using are MiG-29s, Su-22s, F-16s, and Eurofighter Typhoons. Now, the Soviet-era jets were made to launch off of roadways because they're built for nuclear war, just like everything in Russia is built for nuclear Armageddon. Now, the F-16s, however, and the F-35s and the F-22s, these were not engineered to deploy from highways. Something about the air intakes or something. I don't know all the details, but it has been done, but only recently have they started experimenting and augmenting and making the modifications to these planes in order to basically launch or take off from public roadways. Why would you want to do this? Why would you want to do this training? Well, it's very concerning because they're assuming then that they might not have their airports, that their airports will be destroyed either by conventional or a tactical nuclear strike. And in the case of all-out nuclear war, one of the first things that's going to go are the airport runways. So you're going to want to have your assets distributed and have them combat ready still, which would require them to be able to take off from public roadways or highways. Now, the public road in question where they're training from is not too far from Kaliningrad and the Suwalki corridor. Okay? He has it here, Suwalki Gap. So maybe I'm pronouncing it wrong. He typically writes things for me phonetically, Suwalki Gap. So we can see there is a mad scramble to prepare for a major war in Europe. Today, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said, in response to Defense Lloyd Austin saying that a NATO conflict with Russia is going to happen if Ukraine falls, Lavrov had this to say. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, by saying that NATO and Russia could end up fighting each other if Ukraine is defeated, proved that the U.S. has a plan for it. Very interesting. Now, we're not hearing anything from the U.S. about deploying troops. However, 5 countries have followed in suit to what Macron has said. French President Emmanuel Macron was the first to announce this and explained that his statement was completely deliberate and considered. So he doubled down, insisting that indeed he meant what he said when he talked about putting troops on the ground in Ukraine. After that, Prime Minister of Estonia, Kaja Kallas, who is on the Russian wanted list apparently, said that we have to do everything so that Ukraine wins and Russia loses this war, including possible deployment of troops on the ground. Lithuanian officials are also considering the possibility of sending troops to Ukraine for military training. Now, you have to ask yourself, who's training who? The Ukrainians have the most amount of military experience. Now, maybe they're talking about teaching a conscript who's never seen a gun before how to fire a gun. But to me, you would think that Ukraine would still have the manpower in order to do that, and that they would want to do that themselves. Why would they entrust? So these guys are clearly going there for another purpose, and I'm going to give you a possible theory as to why in just a moment. Something you're not going to hear anywhere else, I assure you. The Netherlands has become the 4th country whose Chief of Defense Staff, General Onno Eichelscheim, does not rule out the possibility of sending troops to Ukraine, but notes that now is not the time to talk about such a scenario. Canada's Bill Blair, you know, the guy with the upside-down frown, always confirms, not the upside-down frown, the incredibly arched frown that I don't know if this guy's face has just succumbed to the gravitational pull of the earth, but it is something else. You got to go and Google that guy. It's incredible. His basically his resting state is this frown, and it's like his lips have, I don't know what happened to him. If something happened to him in his childhood that he just has it out for everybody, but I don't know. He wants to take our guns, he wants to suppress our ability to report on the news, and he wants to send us off to war. Anyways, Canada has also said that they might have to put troops on the ground in Ukraine as well. Now, why is this all happening? Could it be that Zelensky, and there are talks right now, there was some conversations that were leaked between mercenaries and different elements of the Ukrainian military that suggest that some people might be plotting some kind of coup in Ukraine. And moving these troops into place could be some attempt to either interdict in those plans or to fortify Zelensky's crew and supply them with more reinforcements, so to speak, in the form of NATO. Or this is a message to those people who might be trying to overthrow Zelensky or are ready to turn and join the Russians, for which we can presume there's probably a lot of those. Because you understand there's a lot of people on the fence. A lot of people who are waiting to pick a side to see who's going to win. And they're going to pick the side of whoever they believe now has the upper hand in this conflict. And if they start to see, okay, China, Russia, this golden billion is probably on its last legs and taking its last dying breath like a man on old man on life support. We're going to go with the 7 billion strong global south led by China and Russia. That's who we're going to put our bets on. And you're going to have a lot of people like that who are on the fence. And I think something is about to kick off in the Balkans as well. But a lot of people, it seems like they could potentially go in the other direction. So could it be that this talk of troop deployments inside Ukraine are just an attempt to reinforce the Zelensky regime because they're worried that this guy is going to be taken out of power? That's a possibility. GPS attacks on the countries just outside of Western Ukraine continue unabated. Now, there's been a lot of attacks today on St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg, of course, is way far away from the battle zone. And these attacks came in through the Gulf of Finland. And they know that because they intercepted some drones over the Gulf of Finland. So this means one of two things. Either that Ukraine has ships in the Baltic Sea, and this is where they're launching these attacks from, which would make the most sense, or someone in the Baltics is complicit with this, and it is in fact NATO that is targeting St. Petersburg. Now, these operations, you need to understand, serve a dual purpose: to test the fences of Russian defense. So this is potentially a strategic risk factor for the Russians, which is why they're so vocal right now about the nuclear risks, because these could be probing operations by NATO as to how they're going to potentially do some kind of decapitation strike or fight a war with the Russians. So while these drone attacks in and of themselves are mere Pyrrhic victories, these little bee sting attacks, they're not really going to amount to much other than terrorizing the population and potentially creating some discontent inside Russia. They serve the other purpose of testing the Russian defenses. And then this, of course, becomes a strategic issue for the Russians, which could cause them to want to retaliate against NATO countries or the countries that are facilitating these drone attacks, which for all we know is the Baltic states. For all we know, it's carrier groups in the Baltic Sea right now. So something is definitely going on with these drone strikes. The attacks on Russian critical infrastructure continue unabated. Air defense systems shot down several targets in the Lomonovsky district in the Leningrad region, and some actually hit their targets. Okay. What else do we have to talk about today? World War III is possible, according to a former French Prime Minister. Former French Prime Minister Manuel Valls claimed on Thursday, "We cannot accept the hypothesis of victory of Vladimir Putin, which would represent the end of Ukrainian democracy and the strategic, military, political, and moral defeat of Europe." So they actually believe that a defeat in Ukraine will lead to the strategic defeat of Europe. Now the question remains, how is this possible? Why is this the case? The only way you could say that this means the strategic defeat of Europe is if you're conceding that economically, in order for Europe to have any measure of industry, and in order for the euro as a currency to maintain its second global currency, a global reserve currency of choice status, it would have to ensure that it had a cheap energy source to fuel all that. The only way they get cheap energy at this point is either through Ukraine, because Ukraine does have some natural gas, they do have some energy, not on the same scale as Russia. But of course, the other prize here is balkanizing Russia and breaking that up and going in there and stealing their resources, and controlling their resources. So the only way this is a strategic victory is if they win in Ukraine and are able to diminish Russia's sphere of influence and possibly even get at some of those resources that they need to fuel their own country. So it's interesting that they're actually saying that it's a existential crisis for Europe. Now, Finland has also admitted, and this is a very, very dangerous one in light of what I just told you about what happened over the Gulf of Finland today. Their new president is saying that Finland needs a real nuclear deterrent. So Finland wants nuclear weapons. Finland's new president, Alexander Stubb, I believe I'm pronouncing that right, Alexander Stubb, said NATO's nuclear deterrent must be real for Finland as he took office on Friday after winning a close-fought presidential election on February 11th. I would start from the premise that we in Finland must have a real nuclear deterrent. And that's what we have because NATO practically gives us 3 deterrences through our membership. The first is the military, the second is missiles and ammunition, and the third is a nuclear deterrent, which of course is from the United States. But they want more assurance from the United States. They want a greater U.S. force presence within the country and the possible deployment of nuclear weapons. Now, if nuclear weapons are deployed in Finland, which is so close to Russia's border, I cannot see how that wouldn't be a red line for Russia. I believe that it would take a lot for the United States to commit to doing that. However, nowadays, anything is possible. They might view it as a way to de-escalate the situation for all we know. The head of the German Ministry of Health is calling for the preparation of their healthcare system for war. Now, I probably should have brought this up first because this is a very concerning headline. The head of the German Ministry of Health called for the preparing of the healthcare system for war. The head of the German Ministry of Health called for a possible military conflict, preparing the healthcare system for said conflict, noting that if Germany joined the alliance, Germany could become a center for providing assistance to the wounded from other countries. So they're concerned that this war is going to spread into the Baltics and Poland, and that the Germans need to get their adaptive capacity of their healthcare system prepared to accept casualties from the frontline intermarium conflict that's going to be ensuing. Now, you can go and get a transcript of the German officers who are planning on destroying the Crimean Bridge. I'm still not sure what to make of it, but it's a rather interesting conversation. It seems they're spitballing various scenarios in which the Taurus system could be deployed. Something that stood out in terms of how the conversation progressed. One of them had said, Defense Minister Pistorius intends to carefully work out the issue of supplying Taurus missiles to Ukraine. We have a meeting scheduled with him. Everything needs to be discussed so that we can start working on the issue. So this tells you that in spite of whatever Scholz is saying about not wanting to commit Taurus missiles, they're going to do it. They're just trying to figure out not only the best way to do it, but also how to do it in such a way that it's going to actually be effective, okay? And he also says that now we know the reason why the Chancellor refuses to send the Taurus missiles, because they will not work. So if one of their most advanced weapon systems doesn't work, then that could actually scare a lot of people within NATO. And as that old saying goes, you know, the Russians are slow to harness but fast to ride. That maybe the Russians are indeed starting to gain the upper hand. Apparently there was an attempt recently, just 24 hours ago, on the Crimean Bridge. All of the Scalp missiles were intercepted. Okay, I think they sent a volley of probably 20 of these missiles. Half were decoys, half were missiles. We're talking millions of dollars were missiles. All were destroyed in their attempts to take out the Crimean Bridge, these Storm Shadow missiles. So maybe NATO is, in fact, the emperor that has no clothes, and it's just all talk at this point in time. Some of you know that Russia's nuclear threshold is allegedly much lower than a lot of people thought for utilizing nuclear weapons. However, I don't know about this, okay? This is a supposed leak. Russian President Vladimir Putin said in a speech on Thursday that Russia's nuclear arsenal is on full combat alert, and they're selecting targets to strike on NATO territory and contemplating the most efficient means of destruction. Now, earlier in the week, it came out that the tactical nuclear threshold is much lower But I'm skeptical about this because here are some of the criteria for Russians to utilize nuclear weapons. If 20% of their strategic ballistic missile submarines are destroyed, I'm presuming that that would have to be either at port or somewhere in the Black Sea. Because if you're talking about a Russian strategic ballistic missile submarine, even one going down in the ocean, for starters, that means all the nukes on it are also at the bottom of the ocean. I cannot see how the Russians allow for one of these to be targeted, much less actually sunk, taken out of commission, I should say. 30% of Russia's nuclear-powered attack submarines out of action. 30%. What does that mean? Does that mean, are they referring to those at port? Are they talking about an EMP scenario where maybe some of their submarines are taken out in electromagnetic pulse attack? And that is the criteria. 30%? That seems crazy to me, that they would let it get that bad. 3 or more naval cruisers sunk. 3 or more airfields flattened. Like, why 3? Why not 1? Why not 2? Why not 4? I don't understand 3. Main or reserve coastal command centers come under simultaneous attack. These are all criteria for when they would utilize tactical nuclear weapons. So I find that very suspect, and I find a lot of these leaks that we are currently seeing right now in the media very suspect as well. What else do we got to talk about today? Russia has rejected nuclear arms talks, okay? So the actual New START treaty is going to be expiring on February 5th of 2026, which basically doesn't matter because it's defunct. It's not being honored. Neither side are authorizing inspections as we speak. So, and really, I think this is all just a smokescreen because it's not even so much the nuclear weapons that are the threat, it's the deployment systems. And there's no restriction under New START on deployment systems. It's only about how many nukes you can have. So 1,200 nukes, or whatever is currently allowed under New START to be active, is more than enough to fight any World War III scenario, for the most part. Maybe you could argue you could have some redundancy, but right now, the Russians are accelerating, and what's most important is to provide a deployment system so that that thing can't be shot down or it can reach its target in a quick manner without the other side knowing what hit it. And that's what the Russians are mastering. So New START does not cover the deployment systems, which is the most important thing. So for me, this New START treaty is kind of pointless, to be brutally honest. It does stop nuclear proliferation to a degree, but it's not really nuclear proliferation this day and age that's the problem. When you can have one nuke put in space to take out all the satellites, to take out all the power grids, a handful of nukes detonated at high altitude over very strategic locations would disable the power grid. And then, you have hundreds of more that you can put on target very quickly in a way which can't be intercepted. I mean, that's what you want. So anyways, moving over to Israel, according to CNN, they believe that Israel is planning to launch a ground invasion into Lebanon in late spring or early summer. Now, I only say CNN. I know there's going to be a lot of people, oh, he said CNN, oh, he's so brainwashed. No, I say that because once it reaches that point where it's in the de facto media, the legacy networks, then it's a done deal, okay? And we've been talking about this for a long time. The problem is, however, that this is going to create chaos in the Middle East, and that chaos can definitely spill over into the conflict in Ukraine. It's not necessarily imminent in the next few weeks, but perhaps later this spring, an Israeli military operation is a distinct possibility, according to an unnamed senior Biden administration official. The official said that Israel wants to go into Lebanon to mow the grass to destroy some of Lebanon's infrastructure, or Hezbollah's infrastructure. If the invasion doesn't happen, the official said there would need to be some sort of buffer zone where either troops from Lebanon's regular army or UN peacekeepers are deployed. I cannot see Lebanon tolerating peacekeepers in their country. There's certain problems with invading Lebanon that should be obvious to many people in light of what's happened in Gaza. One is the terrain. Okay, so this is not like Gaza where it's just flat. And now, of course, it's been flattened. But this is a region which is full of hills and mountains, and the tunnel system is much more sophisticated and extensive there. They have a lot more manpower. They have 100,000 hardened troops. Okay, that's not counting all of the conscripts and the IRGC-backed militias that can reinforce them in their action. And of course, the Houthis are just itching for a ground campaign, so I'm sure they'll be able to get reinforcements from Yemen as well. And of course, their arsenal is far more sophisticated than Hamas. They have all kinds of sophisticated anti-tank weaponry as well. And then, of course, there's the Russians in the rear in Syria, who, as much as they're not going to participate, there is the possibility that they get pulled into this conflict because, of course, Israel is now providing Ukraine with early detection systems for air defense. So I would encourage people to keep on prepping because we have to trust what we're seeing with our eyes at this point in time and understand that the smokescreen that is put there for public consumption is only the surface level media war. The real clandestine war is happening behind the scenes, and it definitely is something which is far more complicated than what we're seeing. But all of these maneuvers and these public disclosures of information are happening because of things that are going on under the surface that we do not see. So keep on prepping, my friends, and I would encourage you to start preparing not just for the fantasy bug out scenario, but prepare to be left to your own devices for months, if not years on end. And I would encourage you to check out the 2-hour conversation that I had with a friend of mine, Dean. For some reason, whenever we release a practical video now, it gets like half the views as these daily updates. And I understand, I don't know if it's YouTube that is tripping it up in the algorithm, or I don't know if it's just people who are not interested in getting that type of information, but that information is there. Okay, we release that information all the time. If you're not seeing it, then maybe I would encourage you to go and check on our channel. Maybe it's not showing up in your feed because YouTube doesn't think you're interested in it. We're going to be looking into uploading on alternate platforms from here on in because, quite frankly, I'm just getting a little exhausted with the current state of things as it's run here on YouTube. And I'm at my wit's end for how to deal with the situation. I'm still going to be uploading on YouTube, of course. YouTube is generally a good platform for us, but I find that right now our reach has been bracketed to a certain extent, and I still have not figured out the reasons as to why. So we're going to be considering alternatives from this point forward, but if you're looking for that blue strip actionable content, it most certainly exists on this channel. It probably just isn't reaching your notifications. So go and check that out and get yourself a ProOne gravity water filter. Best way to support the channel, CanadianPreparedness.com, and a Zendure power system. We have just portable power banks, we have the mid-range stuff, and we also have the whole home stuff as well. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care. Canadian Prepper out.